Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live event. What impact the spring budget can make to your pension planning. Now the dust has settled since the 15th of March 2023, me and Peter Robbins will unpack the details of what the pension changes mean for your pension planning. We've created some slides, so we're going to share some slides with you now and start running through our presentation. Let's start with high-level changes. The annual allowance has increased from £40,000 to £60,000. The level of income, annual allowance starts to reduce, has increased to £260,000 per annum. The lowest level the annual allowance can reduce to has increased from £4,000 to £10,000. Where the money purchase annual allowance is applicable, this has increased to £10,000. And the lifetime allowance charge has reduced to zero from the start of the current tax year, whilst the lifetime allowance altogether is planned to be abolished from the start of next tax year. This LinkedIn Live event will focus on lifetime allowance. So let's start. What is the lifetime allowance? The lifetime allowance, quite simply, is a total amount you can build up in your pension arrangements without incurring a tax charge. The lifetime allowance has changed significantly over the years, as we can see on screen here. We've got a table looking at the standard lifetime allowance from the tax year 2011 to where we are today, with again the planned abolishment from next tax year. The spring budget introduced a reduction in the lifetime allowance tax charge to zero, as I've already stated, and these are the type of people that could be affected from the changes. If you have a combined pension funds which exceed or are close to 1073100, if you want to pay more into a pension, if you previously applied for lifetime allowance protection, and if you want to benefit from employer pension contributions. Let's try and put some of these numbers and information into a scenario then. We have here Mrs. Williams, who has total defined contribution pension funds of circa 1.4 million. And I want to highlight how the LTA changes has impacted what would have happened last tax year versus what would happen potentially this tax year. On the left-hand side is the 22-23 tax year, and you'll see the first line is a total pension value of 1.4 million. Should Mrs. Williams have needed and desired maximum tax-free cash from her combined pensions, but say no income, I would typically advise that she crystallise up to the lifetime allowance last tax year, which was 1073100. Releasing maximum tax-free cash of £268,275, placing the residual funds 804,825 into drawdown, leaving anything above and over the lifetime allowance in uncrystallised funds, 326,900. This, of course, avoided the lifetime allowance charge at 25%, which would have been around 81,000 at that point in time. If you look at the right-hand side now, let's take the same scenario. Mrs. Williams wants maximum tax-free cash from her pension. We now have the facility to crystallise all funds, which would place a different amount into drawdown, as you see here on the right-hand side, £1,131,725, with no remaining uncrystallised funds and, quite crucially, no lifetime allowance tax charge. I'm sure most of you are looking at this screen now, think it's pretty obvious what to do, but I guess I must state everyone's circumstances are different, and my advice most certainly would not be to crystallise all pension funds just to avoid a tax charge. One quite simple reason for that is if crystallising too many funds for what's required is taking funds outside of an IHT-friendly environment. So I think, quite crucially, thoughtful consideration needs to be given about the benefits and drawbacks of crystallising your pension at any point in time. But here is just to highlight the differences between last tax year and this tax year in relation to crystallisation and the potential lifetime allowance tax charge. And most certainly in this instance, it's very beneficial for Mrs. Williams. So now over to Peter to discuss tax-free cash and fixed protection in a little bit more detail.
Thank you, Declan. So as Declan pointed out, the lifetime allowance tax charge has been reduced to zero and in future to be abolished. That raised questions around tax-free cash entitlement. As we know, historically, people's entitlement to tax-free cash was 25% of their available lifetime allowance. So if lifetime allowance is going, well, what's actually going to happen? So within the spring budget, they announced that the lifetime allowance figure that Declan referred to, which is 1,073,100, is actually going to remain in place in relation to tax-free cash entitlement. So as we've got here at the top, moving forward, tax-free cash will be 25% of your fund value that you crystallise, but capped at a maximum tax-free cash amount of 268,275, which is currently 25% of the lifetime allowance. Now, obviously, that would raise question marks with people who have previously applied for fixed protection. Fixed protection was available when, as on the previous slide, Declan showed that the lifetime allowance had been reducing since it was introduced. You were able to apply for fixed protection, which effectively protected that lifetime allowance at the time for you. So in this table, we can see those with fixed protection in 2012, they keep that higher lifetime allowance figure in relation to their tax-free cash. So they protected their lifetime allowance at 1.8 million, and they still will benefit from a tax-free cash of up to £450,000. That follows through to 2014 and 2016. Obviously, we can see there that the protected lifetime allowance figure is reduced. However, those who've got that protection would still benefit from that maximum tax-free cash entitlement. One of the things that came from the spring budget was the ability to contribute to pensions even if you've got fixed protection. So if I take a step back, those who applied for fixed protection 2012, they protected their lifetime allowance at 1.8 million. However, at that point, they were no longer able to accrue or make further pension contributions into their pension arrangements. Should they have done that, they would have lost that protected lifetime allowance figure. So for 2012, they would have lost the 1.8 million, and then they would have been subject to the standard lifetime allowance. Moving forward, so those who've previously applied for it can now pay into their pension. They will retain that protected lifetime allowance figure in relation to their fixed protection, their tax-free cash, sorry.
Yeah.
So anybody with fixed protection in 2012, if their pension fund was worth more than 1.8 million, they could carry on making contributions while still retaining the ability to access £450,000 worth of tax-free cash. So that's obviously a benefit for those people who historically have applied for fixed protection. The cut-off for fixed protection 16 was the day of the budget. So unfortunately, after the budget, if you'd applied for protection, you still wouldn't have had that enhanced LTA for the tax-free cash payment. But obviously, if I move on to the next slide, pensions aren't all about tax-free cash entitlement. So here we've got what the position in relation to making £100 pension contribution, and then if you withdrew those funds. So basic rate taxpayer, to make £100 contribution would only actually have to pay £80 in, and they'd receive tax relief to take that up to £100. If they then crystallised that £100, withdrew their tax-free cash entitlement at 25%, and then took the remainder as taxable income, their net benefit would actually be £85. So you get an increased value of £5 on the £80 that it cost you to start with. If we follow that down for higher and additional rate taxpayers, we could see that the increased value increases due to the additional tax relief that you would get on the initial contributions. However, some people turn around and go, okay, well, my pension's worth 1.2 million. I'm only on the standard LTA. What's the point in me making further pension contributions if I'm not going to get any tax-free cash? Well, the key bit here is if you put the money in and take the money out at the same tax level that you currently are, there's no increase in value. So effectively, you're no better off, but you're no worse off.
Okay.
What's quite key here is if you're currently a higher rate taxpayer, it costs you £60 to put that in. But if in retirement, when you're drawing benefits, you actually were a basic rate taxpayer, you would actually get £80 back, therefore giving you a £20 increase on the initial cost of your contribution. So if you're going to stay the same tax level now and in retirement, initially it looks as though you're not gaining any value. But if you're going to reduce your tax level in retirement, you're still going to benefit from your tax relief that you receive. So it's still beneficial from a monetary perspective. The additional bit to this, because people could look at this and go, okay, I'm a high rate taxpayer. I'm going to get no extra tax-free cash. So I'm neutral. I'm going to just put my money into my ISA. Potentially logical. But the add-on of making the contribution to your pension is that money is outside your estate for IHT purposes, whereas by putting it into an ISA, it's still actually treated as being in your estate for IHT.
Yeah.
Therefore, it comes back to what actually is the purpose and what you're planning to do with the money. If you need immediate access to it, you may not want to put it into your pension. Alternatively, if your plan is to not touch it and you've already got an estate that's going to incur inheritance tax, there could be additional benefits of putting it into your pension. Obviously, in the unlikely scenario that you're a basic rate or higher rate taxpayer now and in retirement, you're actually going up, you might get a net benefit of less, but again, the value of that is still sat outside your estate until you start drawing on benefits.
Yeah.
I think what we're talking about here is obviously everything that's been announced in the spring budget. And I think pretty much immediately, the Labour Party announced that they would look to reintroduce lifetime allowance. Now, it's quite a sad state of affairs that politicians are using pensions as almost a political football rather than what the purpose of them is as a retirement fund for individuals. We can only obviously plan and use the legislation as it is today. There's a lot of talk about Labour reintroducing it. Would they be able to reintroduce it? Nobody knows. There's a lot of ifs, buts, and what's, maybes. The key point of this is to actually think, well, at the moment, nothing should change until the next general election. So what we have actually got is a window of opportunity between now and that time to plan and use the legislation, make the most of the tax charge being reduced to naught. Should Labour reintroduce it, individuals may have benefited from this short window.
Yeah.
But we don't know what Labour could introduce. And that's also making the assumption that Labour come back into power. So there are a lot of elements to consider, a lot of moving parts. And it just goes to highlight the importance of speaking to the right people rather than just thinking, I'm going to make a decision, do this because it seems sensible. It's about taking an overall perspective and going, well, actually, you might not need to do it now. We have got this bit of time. So, going back to Mrs. Williams might not crystallise all of those funds in excess of a LTA now. She may actually delay that until the point of the next general election.
Yeah.
Because there could be knock-on consequences. So, as I said, it's all about just taking a broad picture and making sure that when you're looking at your pensions and what to do, particularly around lifetime allowance, that all the bases are covered and you've considered all of the ins and outs of everything.
Peter, that's great. Thanks for going into a lot of detail there, especially around funding pensions with fixed protection. That's a question I often get asked. We're gonna wrap up now. I mean, it's an incredibly complex topic, lifetime allowance, pension legislation. I'll just echo Peter's comments around taking the right advice, not actioning things just because about what you might have read somewhere. It's about taking a holistic approach about what's right for you both now and in the future. Peter has drafted a good article on this, which goes into probably a little bit more detail than what we've gone into today. That's on our website, so please go and have a look at that, check that out, and get in contact if you need any more information. But I hope you've enjoyed today's session. It's a short snapshot, but hopefully it gives you some vital tips and information to take away. And that just leaves me to say thanks for your time. And we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks all.